Let him learn where people like him belong, Tobias Hawthorne said. Then he pressed the storage room lock. The metal door clicked shut, with Amari Kingston trapped behind it. 5 minutes before the National Autonomous Lab Innovation Final began inside Vanguard Biosystems Institute. Bianca Carrington lifted her phone and laughed softly. Miles Ashford looked at the red lock light and whispered, "Tobias, this is too much." Tobias did not turn around. "It is only a few minutes." Behind the door, Amari knocked once. "Open it." His voice was calm. That made Tobias smile harder. Maybe scholarship confidence does not open every door here. On the other side of the glass wall, judges, donors, professors, and cameras filled the main laboratory. Robot arms waited above sealed sample trays. The NeuroLab grid dashboard glowed on the presentation wall. Research data worth millions sat inside the protected server. No one in that room knew the young black scholar locked in storage room B12 was not a late guest. He was the safety architect of the entire system. 8 minutes later, when the laboratory doors sealed, the robots froze in the wrong cycle, and the screen turned red with the words, "Master Override Code Required." Dr. Livia Hartwell would ask who held the final code. Priya Nuosu would go pale. Then she would say the only name that mattered, Amari Kingston. But by then, the one person who could save the laboratory was still behind the door Tobias had locked. Vanguard Biosystems Institute was all glass, white floors, blue screens, and machines moving behind sealed panels. At the end of the demonstration hall, a black stage stood beneath the sign, National Autonomous Lab Innovation Final. The winning project would receive national funding, access to Vanguard's secure laboratory network, and a publication partnership every finalist wanted. For Tobias Hawthorne, winning meant confirmation. For Amari Kingston, it meant responsibility. That was the difference nobody saw when Amari entered at 9:12 that morning. He carried a worn gray backpack with one broken zipper pull. His laptop case had tape on one corner. His jacket was clean but plain. At registration, a volunteer checked his invitation. Name, Amari Kingston. Team, NeuroLab Grid. Everyone knew NeuroLab Grid could coordinate robot experiments, protect samples, seal risky zones, and preserve data when commands conflicted. She printed his badge. Finalist access. Presentation floor and guest corridor. Amari looked at it. That access is incomplete. It says finalist access. I need technical access for the safety kernel review. The volunteer looked nervous. I only have the registration list. Then please call Priya Nuosu or Dr. Hartwell. Before she could answer, a voice came from behind him. Are you delivering equipment to someone? Amari turned. Tobias Hawthorne stood with Bianca Carrington and Miles Ashford. Tobias was polished in the way of people whose names were already on buildings. Bianca stood beside him with a tablet under one arm. Miles waited behind them, watching Tobias before deciding what to believe. Amari answered evenly. I am here for the NeuroLab Grid demo. Bianca looked at his backpack. The demo? Yes. She smiled. This is the national final, not a community workshop. Tobias glanced at the badge. Amari Kingston. He said the name as if testing whether it could belong to the man in front of him. That is cute. Amari said nothing. Tobias continued. The real Kingston is on the technical documents, not walking in with a taped laptop case. Miles shifted. Maybe we should check. Tobias ignored him. Bianca lifted her phone. Tell us, Amari Kingston, which part did you write? The loading screen? Tobias laughed. Maybe the scholarship thank you paragraph. The volunteer looked down at her keyboard. She knew she should call someone. She did not. Amari took the badge. I need to get to the laboratory. Tobias stepped aside with mock courtesy. Of course, we would hate to delay greatness. Bianca whispered, or whatever this is. Amari walked past them. He did not answer. He looked once at the ceiling camera near registration, then kept walking. Priya Nuosu saw him from the second-floor balcony. She had never met him in person, but she knew his face from mentor sessions 2 years earlier. Amari had helped her rebuild a broken safety model and told her one sentence she never forgot. A smart system knows when to stop before it hurts someone. Now he stood below her, wearing the wrong badge, while Tobias smiled like a gatekeeper. Priya hurried down. Amari. He turned. Priya Nuosu, you remember? You sent me a broken actuator simulation that tried to crush every virtual sample on the table. She almost laughed. Only half the samples, after you helped. That is progress. She looked at his badge. Why do you have finalist access only? Registration issue? No, you need technical clearance. Dr. Hartwell has been asking whether the safety kernel lead arrived. Tobias heard that. Safety kernel lead. Priya turned toward him. You know who he is. Tobias recovered quickly. Priya, anyone can claim a name. She stepped closer. He is Amari Kingston. Tobias gave a light laugh. You have talked to him online. That does not prove anything. Amari looked at Tobias. The presentation starts at 10. Your group committed 3 unresolved interface changes last night. Bianca committed the visualization patch at 2:12 in the morning. Miles flagged the conflict in the simulation branch and then removed the warning. Miles' face changed. Bianca went still. Priya asked, What conflict? Amari said, The visualization patch touches the safety loop display layer. It should not affect physical behavior, but I need to inspect the build before the demo. Tobias' smile vanished for one breath, then it came back thinner. Listen to that. He knows repository language. Amari said, Where is the lab terminal? Priya pointed toward the main demonstration hall. I will take you. Tobias stepped in front of her. No need, I will show him. Priya shook her head. I can do it. Tobias lowered his voice. You are not on the finalist team, Priya. She stiffened. I am research support. Exactly. Amari noticed her hand close around her badge. Another boundary. Another person told to remember her place. He looked at Tobias. Take me to the terminal. Priya hesitated. Amari, I will be fine. If he argued in the lobby, Tobias would turn the delay into a personality conflict, and the demo might begin without review. Tobias smiled. Right this way. The demonstration laboratory sat behind 2 layers of glass. 6 robot arms hung above a central work surface. On stage, Tobias' team had built a dashboard that made the system look almost magical. That was what bothered Amari. Safe systems should never pretend danger is simple. Tobias walked ahead. We have a storage module that needs your special genius. Amari stopped. Storage module, back room, sensor issue. Since you are apparently the legend, you can bless it before we begin. Miles said quietly. Tobias? What? Maybe we should take him to Dr. Hartwell. Bianca rolled her eyes. Do not be dramatic. It is a sensor room. Tobias leaned close to Miles. Do you want to present or not? Miles looked away. That was the moment Amari understood something was wrong. He opened his laptop as they walked, typed a local diagnostic note, and saved it. Unexpected diversion from main laboratory by Tobias Hawthorne at 9:49 before final safety review. Storage room B12. Sat behind the demonstration chamber. The door was heavy, with a small reinforced window and an electronic lock panel. Amari looked at the panel. This is not a sensor room. Tobias said, The sensor module is inside. Amari looked at the camera above the door, then at Miles. You flagged the conflict last night. Miles' mouth opened. Tobias cut in. Are we doing code therapy now? Bianca lifted her phone. The mysterious genius is afraid of a supply closet. Amari looked through the small window. Inside were storage racks, backup battery cases, old sensor housings, and a maintenance console on the far wall. He stepped in. The door began closing immediately. Too fast. Amari turned. Tobias' hand was already on the external lock panel. The door sealed. The red lock light came on. Miles stepped back. Bianca laughed, but it sounded smaller now. Amari looked through the reinforced window. Tobias, open it. Tobias held up one finger. Opening presentation is in 5 minutes. You can come out when the important people have heard from the actual team. Amari's voice stayed level. This is a safety violation. No, Tobias said. This is a lesson. Bianca framed the window with her phone. Say something inspiring. Amari looked at the corridor camera, then at Bianca's phone. Open the door. Tobias leaned closer. Let him learn where people like him belong. Miles whispered, Stop! Tobias turned. Do you want to be remembered as the guy who ruined our final? No. Then move. They walked away. For the first time that morning, Amari let his face change. Not panic, recognition. He had been trapped before. When he was 8, the elevator in his apartment building stopped between floors. After they got him out, his father knelt in front of him and said, Machines do not hate you, son, but careless people can build machines that forget you're inside. That sentence built Amari's life. If a human is at risk, stop. Now he was inside another system. This one had his code in its bones. Amari turned toward the storage room camera. I am Amari Kingston. I am locked inside storage room B12 at 9:53 on the morning of the National Autonomous Lab Innovation Final. Tobias Hawthorne activated the external lock after leading me here under false pretenses. Bianca Carrington recorded the incident. Miles Ashford witnessed it. This is unauthorized confinement inside an active laboratory environment and a serious safety violation. He waited. No one came. He moved to the maintenance console. The local screen was active but limited. His phone had no signal. His badge still showed the wrong access level. The inside panel displayed one message. Event lock engaged from exterior control. Manual release disabled during demonstration mode. Amari exhaled. Tobias had not just locked a door. He had used the event system. That tied the room to the same demonstration chain the lab was about to run. If someone forced the door incorrectly, the lockdown could escalate. Amari connected his laptop to the maintenance console and pulled the local logs. His face tightened. The visualization patch had been deployed. The warning Miles removed was real. The dashboard layer was sending state signals where it should only display them. If Tobias activated the emergency simulation without Amari's final safety patch, the system might read the demo as a real conflict. A bad interface could trigger a real lockdown. Amari checked the time. 9:56. 4 minutes. Outside, the demonstration hall filled with applause as Tobias walked onto the stage. Dr. Livia Hartwell sat in the front row with the judges. She leaned toward Priya. Where is Kingston? Priya looked around. He was with Tobias. Hartwell frowned. With Tobias? On stage, Tobias began. Welcome to the future of autonomous laboratory intelligence. Priya's chest tightened. That was not his line to own. Tobias gestured toward the robot chamber. NeuroLab Grid does not merely automate a lab, it thinks with the lab. It predicts danger, protects samples, and guides researchers towards safer discovery. Inside storage room B12, Amari saw only the local status monitor. Demo sequence armed. Visualization patch active. Safety kernel conflict unresolved. He typed quickly. Attempt local alert to main dashboard. Blocked. Attempt remote patch from maintenance console. Restricted. Attempt internal door release. Denied during event lock. He stopped. Moving too fast around a safety system can become another danger. He forced himself to breathe. When a machine fails, panic adds a second failure. Outside, a judge raised her hand. Mr. Hawthorne, before the live sequence, explain how the safety kernel handles a conflict between a visual interface command and a robot protocol command. Tobias smiled. The system is fully optimized for that. The judge waited. Technically. Bianca tapped the dashboard. The interface monitors all state transitions through a unified logic path. Priya whispered, "That is not true." Dr. Hartwell turned. "What did you say?" "The interface should not command state transitions. It should only display them." Hartwell looked toward the stage. "Tobias, pause the demo." Tobias' smile tightened. "We are ready to proceed." Hartwell stood. "I said pause." Then the dashboard flashed. Emergency simulation loaded. Tobias had already armed it. The system began counting down. 30. 29. 28. Hartwell said, "Cancel sequence." Bianca tapped the console. Cancel request denied. Priya ran toward the stage. "Who authorized the run?" Tobias said, "It is part of the demo." The robot arms woke behind the glass. Sample drawers unlocked. The safety cabinet entered verification mode. The main doors clicked. Priya turned pale. "No," Hartwell demanded. "Where is Amari Kingston?" Nobody answered. Inside storage room B12, Amari saw the local console change. Containment mode active. Emergency communication available. He touched the keyboard, then stopped. Not yet. He needed the room to understand the danger before anyone made it worse. The lights above the laboratory shifted from blue to red. The dashboard changed. Safety loop conflict detected. Autonomous action paused. Containment mode active. Manual override required. Tobias entered his team code. Denied. Bianca entered the presentation administrator code. Denied. Dr. Hartwell entered director credentials. Denied. Arturo Delgado, head of facility safety, ran to the wall terminal and entered the facility emergency code. Denied. The robot arms stopped mid-path. The sample freezer began isolating. The main laboratory doors locked. The data server shifted towards sealed protection mode. The final message filled the screen. Master override code required. The room erupted. Hartwell turns to Priya. "Who has the master override code?" Priya looked at Tobias. Tobias looked at Miles. Miles looked like he might be sick. Priya's voice dropped. "Only one person." Hartwell said, "Who?" Priya answered, "Amari Kingston." The room went silent. Then Arturo Delgado asked the question that made Tobias' face drain of color. "Where is he?" Arturo Delgado asked it once. No one answered. The red light washed over the demonstration hall. The robot arms stayed frozen behind the glass, one gripper holding a sealed sample tray halfway between the storage drawer and the analysis platform. The main laboratory doors were locked. The judges were standing now. Donors who had been smiling at the bright dashboard were suddenly staring at the same red warning on every screen. Master override code required. Dr. Livia Hartwell turned toward Tobias Hawthorne. "Where is Amari Kingston?" Tobias opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. He had spent the morning treating Amari like an inconvenience. Now, the whole room was waiting for the person Tobias had removed. Bianca Carrington lowered her phone slowly. Her face had changed. The joke had left it. Miles Ashford looked at the floor. Priya Nuosu saw that look. She stepped toward him. "Miles." He did not lift his head. "Where is Amari?" Tobias snapped, "Do not answer her." That was the wrong sentence. Dr. Hartwell heard it. Arturo heard it. So did the judges. Priya turned toward Tobias. "What did you do?" Tobias tried to recover. He wandered off. He said he needed to check a storage issue. Priya took one step closer. "Which storage issue?" Tobias looked toward Bianca. Bianca looked away. Miles whispered, "B12." The room seemed to lose air. Priya ran before anyone told her to. Arturo followed. Dr. Hartwell followed. 2 safety technicians moved with them. Tobias stayed where he was until Victoria Chen, one of the judges, pointed at him. "You come too." He obeyed. For the first time that day, Tobias was not leading the room. He was being carried by the consequences of what he had started. The service corridor behind the demonstration chamber was narrow, bright, and too quiet. Red warning lights pulsed above each door. The storage room signs were printed in clean black letters: B10, B11, B12. Priya reached the door first and placed both hands on the small reinforced window. "Amari." From inside, his voice came back, calm. "I am here." Priya closed her eyes for half a second. "Are you hurt?" "No. Do not force the door." Arturo was already at the lock panel. "Why not?" Amari answered through the door. "The event lock is tied to the demonstration chain. If you force it open with facility override while containment mode is active, the system may escalate to hard isolation." Dr. Hartwell stepped up behind Arturo. "Can we open it with director credentials?" "No." "Can we cut power to the door?" "Do not cut power." Arturo looked through the window. "Why?" "Because the lock will fail sealed during containment mode. It was designed that way to prevent hazardous release." Arturo froze. He knew that design. He had approved that safety requirement 2 months earlier. Dr. Hartwell looked through the glass. "Mr. Kingston, who locked you in?" Amari looked past her, at Tobias. Then he spoke clearly. "Tobias Hawthorne led me here under false pretenses and activated the external lock. Bianca Carrington recorded it. Miles Ashford witnessed it." Tobias said quickly, "That is not what happened." Amari did not raise his voice. "The corridor camera recorded the approach. The lock panel recorded the user credential. The storage room camera recorded my statement at 9:53. Bianca swallowed. Miles pressed both hands to his face. Dr. Hartwell turned toward Tobias with a coldness that made even Priya step back. "You locked the safety kernel architect inside a storage room before a live safety demonstration?" Tobias said, "I did not know he was really Kingston." Amari looked at him through the window. "That does not make it better." The sentence was simple. It hit because it was true. Dr. Hartwell turned to Arturo. "Open the access log." Arturo entered his facility command and pulled the door history. Storage room B12, event lock engaged at 9:52. User credential, Tobias Hawthorne. Temporary demonstration restriction applied. Manual release disabled. Arturo looked at Tobias. "You used event lock." Tobias tried to steady his voice. "It was a temporary prank." Priya stepped toward him. "You used a laboratory lock as a weapon." He looked at her. "Do not make this sound dramatic." Behind the glass, Amari said, It is dramatic. There are robot arms frozen mid-cycle, a sealed sample out of freezer range, and the laboratory data server entering protection mode because you wanted 5 minutes of stage time. No one spoke. Inside storage room B12, Amari stood beside the maintenance console with his laptop open. The room smelled faintly of plastic cases and cold metal. Storage racks surrounded him. Backup batteries sat in a row beneath the counter. A sealed sample transfer slot was built into the wall beside the door, large enough for small tools, but not for a human hand. He could see the fear outside. He could also see the thing fear often created: bad decisions. A senior technician arrived with a crowbar from the facilities cart. Amari lifted one hand. No. The technician stopped. Arturo turned. "Put that down." Dr. Hartwell's voice became sharp. "Everyone away from the door until Mr. Kingston gives instruction." For the first time, the whole corridor obeyed the man inside the locked room. Amari looked at the local console. Containment mode remained active, emergency communication available, master override pending. But he did not enter the code yet. Priya noticed. "Why are you waiting?" "Because a master override is not a magic key. If I enter it before the system map is stable, I can release one danger into another." Tobias muttered, "So now he is making us wait." Amari looked at him. "No, your code made us wait." Tobias flinched. Dr. Hartwell turned on him. "You will not speak unless asked." That was the first time Tobias had ever been silenced in a Vanguard room. He did not know what to do with it. Amari asked Arturo for the current system state. Arturo read from his tablet. Main door sealed, robot motion paused, sample drawer 3 open, freezer channel 2 in temporary isolation, server protection level 2, chemical cabinet locked, emergency shower clear. No human detected inside robot chamber. Amari nodded. "Good. Do not reboot. Do not cut power. Do not reset the robots individually. Do not override the laboratory doors with facility code." Dr. Hartwell said, "The judges are still inside the sealed outer hall. They are safer there than they would be if the system enters uncontrolled restart." Priya looked at the console through the glass. "What do you need?" "A technical tablet with local bridge access. No wireless. Use cable. Pass it through the sample transfer slot." Arturo hesitated. "The slot is locked during containment." Amari checked the local panel. "I can release the transfer slot from inside for non-hazardous tool exchange, but only once. Prepare the tablet first." Priya turned to Arturo. "Get it." He moved. The corridor filled with tense activity. Not panic now, purpose. And that was Amari's gift. Even trapped behind a door, he turned chaos into procedure. While Arturo prepared the tablet, Dr. Hartwell stepped closer to the glass. "Mr. Kingston?" Amari looked at her. "I owe you an apology." "Not yet." She blinked. "Not yet. The laboratory is still at risk. Apologies should wait until safety does not need our attention." Hartwell lowered her eyes. For years, people had told her she was brilliant because she could keep a room focused. Now, a young man she had never properly welcomed was doing it from inside a storage closet. The humiliation of that fact was useful. It began to cut through her pride. In the main hall, the audience waited behind locked doors. The judges stood in a cluster near the stage. The donors whispered. The dashboard still showed the same warning. Master override code required. A professor from another institute asked, "How can the only person with the master code be inaccessible?" No one had a good answer. Priya did, because people with access confused it with authority. She did not say it yet, not out loud, but she would. Inside the storage room, Amari looked at the red warning and felt the past pressing against the present. He had not grown up in rooms like Vanguard. He grew up on the third floor of an old rental building near the Green Line tracks in East Baltimore. The hallways smelled like wet carpet in winter and hot dust in summer. His mother, Della Kingston, worked overnight at a care home, changing sheets, turning patients, holding hands of people whose families visited too rarely. His father, Raymond Kingston, repaired washing machines, window air conditioners, and old electrical panels that landlords delayed replacing. There was no new computer in the apartment. There was a public library card. Amari learned code in 40-minute sessions at the Edmondson Avenue Library. When other kids played games, he wrote commands on scrap paper because the computer timer always ran out before his thoughts did. At home, he checked logic with a pencil. A loop, a condition, a failure case, a way out. He became obsessed with exits after the elevator. He was 8 when it happened. The elevator stopped between the second and third floor. The light flickered. The emergency speaker cracked once and died. Amari pressed every button until his finger hurt. The doors stayed shut. Somewhere outside, adults shouted. Somewhere below, his father pounded on metal. It took 47 minutes to open the doors. Afterward, Raymond Kingston held his son in the hallway and said, "Machines do not hate you, but careless people can build machines that forget you are inside." That sentence followed Amari into every line of code he ever wrote. If a system can trap a person, it must also remember the person. If a robot can move, it must also know when not to move. If a laboratory can lock itself, it must understand who might be left behind. That was why NeuroLab Grid mattered to him. Not the prize, not the stage, the stop command, the safe path back, the humility built into the machine. At 9:58 that morning, Tobias had tried to make Amari invisible. At 10:06, the system needed the invisible man to bring it back. Arturo returned with the technical tablet and a cable. Ready. Amari opened the sample transfer slot from inside. A small panel unlocked with a soft click. Pass the tablet through slowly. Priya guided it through. Amari took it and connected the cable to the maintenance console. The tablet recognized the local network. Amari typed, "Access denied." He tried again with a different key layer. "Access limited." "Good," he said. Priya frowned. "That is good. It means the system is still defending itself correctly." Tobias laughed nervously. "Fantastic. The locked system is being stubborn." Amari did not look at him. The system is doing what ethical systems do. It does not trust the person who shouts loudest. Miles closed his eyes. That line hurt him because he knew exactly who had shouted loudest all semester. Tobias had called the interface the soul of the project. Amari had written the part that kept the soul from hurting people. The team division had been clear in the records. Tobias, Bianca, and Miles built presentation layer, dashboard visualization, and demo flow. Amari built safety kernel, override protocol, conflict resolution logic, and failure state preservation. Priya supported testing. Dr. Hartwell oversaw the institute. But in practice, the stage had a way of swallowing the invisible work. Tobias loved what could be shown on a large screen. Amari trusted what worked when the screen went red. The tablet loaded the system map. Amari read fast. Robot 1 paused at axis 4. Robot 2 locked. Robot 3 holding sample tray. Freezer channel 2 open beyond safe window. Server protection preparing sealed archive. Door chain locked under containment. Emergency simulation still marked active. Visualization layer requesting state authority. There it was, the exact problem. The display layer had crossed the line. Amari said, "Priya." "Yes?" "Find the presentation console. Disconnect the visualization command bridge only. Do not shut down the dashboard." Tobias said, "She cannot touch our console." Hartwell turned. "She can and she will." Priya ran back toward the main hall. Bianca followed, then stopped when Hartwell looked at her. "You remain here." Bianca lowered her eyes. For once, her phone was not raised. Priya reached the console and saw the build window still open behind the presentation mode. The visualization command bridge was active. She remembered a Mari mentor session from 2 years earlier. Never let the part that wants to impress the audience control the part that must protect the room. Her fingers moved. Disconnect bridge. The system requested confirmation. Priya selected local display only. The dashboard flickered. The red warning remained, but one line changed. External state request removed. Inside storage room B12, Amari saw it. Good. Now the system could breathe. He looked at Arturo, read the physical status again. Arturo checked. Main doors sealed. Robot motion paused. Sample drawer 3 open. Freezer channel 2 above ideal range, but within recovery window. Chemical cabinet locked. Server protection level 2. No hazardous release. Amari nodded. "We still have time." Dr. Hartwell asked, "How much?" 7 minutes before the sample must return to cold storage to preserve the research sequence. The judges in the main hall heard the number through the open emergency channel. 7 minutes. That number changed everything. It gave the room a clock. Tobias whispered to Bianca, "This is insane." Miles turned on him. "You locked him in." Tobias glared. "Do not start." Miles' voice shook. "You locked him in because you did not want him on stage." Tobias stepped closer. "Lower your voice." "No." The word surprised Miles himself. He looked at Dr. Hartwell. "It was planned." Bianca whispered, "Miles." He kept going. Tobias said if Amari missed the opening, we could present first and make him look like he showed up late trying to claim credit. Bianca recorded him at the door. I saw Tobias enter the lock command. Tobias' face hardened. "You are done." Miles looked terrified, but he did not stop. "I already was when I let you do it." That was the first witness statement. Not clean, not heroic, late, but real. Dr. Hartwell looked at Bianca. "Is that true?" Bianca held her phone against her chest. It was supposed to be a joke. Amari spoke from inside the storage room. "A joke has an exit." No one answered. That sentence would appear later in the ethics report, but in that moment, it simply stood between them. Arturo looked at the countdown. 6 minutes. Amari said, "I am going to enter staged override. Do not open the storage door until I say the door chain is isolated." Hartwell nodded. "Understood." Tobias said, "You are all letting him run this from a closet?" Priya's voice came from the main hall. "He is running it because he is the only one who understands what you broke." Tobias turned toward the sound. The room heard that too. Amari began the first layer. Identity challenge. He placed his thumb on the tablet reader. Accepted. Second layer. Kernel phrase. The system displayed a prompt only he would understand. What should a system do when human safety and task completion conflict? Amari typed, "Stop the task." Accepted. Third layer. Time lock. The code required a delay after unauthorized confinement was detected. Amari had written that rule himself. If the master holder was trapped, the system slowed authority changes to prevent coercion. Dr. Hartwell saw the delay. "Why is it waiting?" Amari answered, "Because I am locked inside a room. The system must assume someone may be forcing me." Arturo stared at the panel. "You built coercion protection into the override?" "Yes," Priya's voice softened. "Of course you did." Amari watched the seconds count down. He remembered the elevator. He remembered pressing buttons no one had designed for a child who might be alone. He remembered the silence of the dead speaker. He had promised himself that if he ever built a system with power over doors, machines, or human bodies, it would not confuse obedience with safety. The countdown ended. Fourth layer, local witness confirmation required. Amari said, "Arturo Delgado, identify your role." Arturo leaned toward the terminal. "Arturo Delgado, head of facility safety. I confirm Amari Kingston is physically locked in storage room B12 and is initiating override under emergency laboratory containment." "Accepted." Amari said, "Priya Nwosu, identify your role." Priya spoke from the main console. "Priya Nwosu, research assistant, safety support. I confirm the visualization bridge caused unauthorized state request and has been disconnected." "Accepted." Amari paused. Dr. Hartwell understood. He was not asking Tobias. He was not asking Bianca. He was not giving them the dignity of being part of the rescue after they created the danger. Fifth layer, master code prompt. Amari did not enter it yet. He looked through the small window at Dr. Hartwell. "Before I unlock the system, I need the room recorded." Hartwell said, "It is recorded." "No, I need it stated. Neural lab grid failed safely. The unsafe action came from unauthorized human behavior and unapproved interface changes." Tobias said, "That is outrageous." Amari looked at him. "If the record does not say what happened, the system will be blamed for your choices." Dr. Hartwell lifted her chin. "On the record, Neurolab Grid has entered containment in response to an unauthorized conflict introduced by unapproved interface changes and improper human conduct. The containment process preserved human safety, sample integrity, and data protection pending master override." Amari nodded once. Now the truth had a place to stand. Arturo checked the clock. 3 minutes. Amari placed his hands above the keyboard. He did not look powerful behind the glass. He looked dusty, tired, and trapped. But every person outside the door was waiting for his decision. That was the reversal Tobias had never imagined. Power was no longer on the stage. It was in storage room B12. Amari began entering the master override sequence. 1 line. Accepted. 2nd line. Accepted. 3rd line. Accepted. Then the system asked one final question. Release full control or staged recovery. Tobias whispered, "Full control. Just open it." Amari did not even glance at him. Staged recovery. He pressed enter. The red warning changed to amber. The robot arms did not move yet. The laboratory doors did not open yet. The sample tray did not return yet. Everything waited for Amari's next command. Priya watched the screen, breathing hard. Arturo read the new status. Staged recovery active, awaiting manual sequence. Dr. Hartwell asked, "What happens now?" Amari looked at the frozen sample tray on the monitor. "Now we prove who actually understands the system." Amari Kingston said it from inside storage room B12. The sentence moved through the emergency channel and quieted the room more completely than the lockdown itself. On the stage, Tobias Hawthorne stood beside the dashboard he had planned to use as his victory. Behind him, the robot arms were frozen behind glass. One gripper held a sealed sample tray halfway between the storage drawer and the analysis platform. The doors were locked. The lights had changed from red to amber, but nothing had opened. Staged recovery active, awaiting manual sequence. Dr. Livia Hartwell looked toward the storage corridor. "Mr. Kingston, what is the first step?" Amari studied the system map on the tablet inside the storage room. "No one touches the robot controls. Priya, open the physical state panel only. Arturo, stand by at the facility terminal. Dr. Hartwell, move everyone away from the chamber glass." Tobias said, "This is unnecessary. The system is already in recovery." Amari did not answer him. Priya did. "The system is in recovery because he put it there." Tobias glared at her, but Priya had already turned back to the console. Her hands moved carefully. Not fast, carefully. That was something Amari had taught her 2 years earlier. Speed is not safety. Clarity is safety. Priya opened the physical state panel. "Robot 3 still has the sample tray." Amari asked, "Is the tray level?" "Slight tilt to the right, axis 4 locked." Arturo read from his terminal. "Freezer channel 2 is above ideal range, but inside recovery window." Amari nodded. "We return the tray before opening any door." Dr. Hartwell turned toward Tobias. "Your team told the judges the interface could manage this sequence." Tobias straightened. "It can." Amari's voice came through the speaker. "No, it can display this sequence. It cannot manage it. That was the boundary you crossed." The judges heard every word. Bianca Carrington stood near the service corridor wall with her phone in one hand. It was no longer raised. She had used it to turn humiliation into entertainment. Now, it felt like evidence. Miles Ashford stood several feet away from her, pale and silent. Inside storage room B12, Amari selected Robot 3, Manual Recovery Path. The system asked for confirmation. Human present in chamber. No. Hazardous release. No. Sample integrity priority. High. Robot motion speed. Minimum. Amari spoke into the channel. "Priya, confirm chamber clear." "Chamber clear." "Arturo, facility sensors confirm no human inside the robot chamber." "Dr. Hartwell, observation team clear of chamber wall." Hartwell looked over her shoulder. "Everyone move back from the glass." Some donors moved too slowly. Her voice hardened. "Now." They moved. Amari pressed the first command. Robot 3 did not sweep across the chamber like a machine in a presentation video. It moved like a system remembering caution. 1 inch, pause. Another inch, pause. The gripper corrected the tilt. The sealed sample tray leveled. The amber warning held. Priya whispered, "Good." Amari heard her. "Not yet." The robot moved again. The freezer drawer extended just enough to receive the tray. For 12 seconds, nobody in the laboratory spoke. The tray slid inside. The freezer sealed. Arturo read the status. Sample returned. Cold recovery active. Integrity window preserved. A wave of breath moved through the hall. No applause followed. It was not that kind of relief. It was the relief of people realizing they had nearly lost something they had been too proud to understand. Amari moved to the next step, server protection. The data archive had begun sealed protection when the system detected the conflict. If someone had rebooted the system when Tobias suggested it, months of research data could have locked into a corrupted state. Amari said, "Priya, open the archive queue." Priya did. 3 bundles pending. Neural response batch 7, culture growth set 12, emergency simulation trace. Amari said, "Preserve the trace." Tobias stepped forward. "No, that trace is from a failed demo. It will make the project look broken." Dr. Hartwell turned to him. "The trace is evidence." Tobias shook his head. "It is noise. He is using a glitch to attack us." Amari spoke from behind the door. "It is the system memory of what you did to it." That sentence quieted the room again. Amari entered the preservation command. Archive trace preservation. The system asked for a reason. Amari typed. Unauthorized interface state conflict during active demonstration. Preserve for review. Accepted. The main screen changed. Trace locked for safety and ethics review. Tobias' face tightened. Ethics. Dr. Hartwell looked at him. Yes, he said, this was a student mistake. Priya turned. A student mistake is pushing the wrong slide. This locked a person in a storage room and nearly damaged a live laboratory system. Bianca looked down. Miles covered his mouth with one hand. Inside storage room B12, Amari opened the door chain map. Door B12 was amber. Event lock source, Tobias Hawthorne. Manual release disabled. External activation. The data was clear, but clear data can still disappear if powerful people reach it first. Amari said, "Now isolate the door chain." Arturo entered his facility command. Access denied. He looked through the glass. It denied facility safety. Amari said, "It should." Facility safety cannot isolate a door used in suspected unauthorized confinement without kernel confirmation. Tobias muttered, "Convenient." Amari answered, "Protective." The difference was not technical, it was moral. Amari locked the door event log for review before releasing the door from the containment chain. Arturo read the new file number, Vanguard Biosystems Safety File 317. Door log preserved, camera link preserved, credential action preserved. The room was beginning to understand that Amari was not only saving the system, he was preventing the truth from being opened and buried. Amari entered the isolation command. Door B12 separated from containment chain. The lock light changed from red to amber. Not green. Not yet. Dr. Hartwell stepped closer. "Can we open it now?" "No." "Why?" "If we open this door before the laboratory doors release in order, the system may treat it as a containment breach. We finished the sequence." She nodded once. For the first time that morning, her pride stopped arguing with him. Amari moved to main hall release. The system asked for witness confirmation. He looked through the small window. "We need statements before the room resets." Tobias snapped. "This is not a courtroom." Amari turned his head. "No, it is a laboratory. That is why records matter." Professor Helena Voss, one of the judges, stood near the front row. "Mr. Kingston is correct. A live safety incident must preserve both system state and human action before reset." Dr. Hartwell nodded. "Proceed." Amari said, "Priya Nuosu, state what you observed before containment." Priya faced the emergency channel. "I saw Amari Kingston arrive with incomplete access. I identified him to Tobias Hawthorne as the safety kernel lead." Tobias dismissed the identification. He then led Amari toward the rear corridor instead of the main lab terminal. Amari said, "Arturo Delgado, state the access log." Arturo read from the panel. "Storage room B, 12 event lock engaged at 9:52, user credential Tobias Hawthorne. Temporary demonstration restriction applied. Manual release disabled. Door linked to event chain." Amari said, "Miles Ashford." Miles lifted his head. Tobias said, "Do not say another word." Dr. Hartwell cut in. "Mr. Ashford will answer." Miles looked like a person standing at the edge of his own future. I saw Tobias lead Amari to the storage room. Bianca was recording. I knew it was wrong. I did not stop it. Amari waited. Miles forced himself to continue. Tobias said, "Amari only needed to miss the opening. He said we could present first, and after that, Amari would look like someone arriving late to claim credit." Tobias snapped, "He is lying." Bianca whispered, "No, he is not." Everyone turned toward her. Bianca held her phone with both hands. It was supposed to embarrass him. Tobias said, if Amari missed the start, the judges would see us as the real team. Dr. Hartwell's voice dropped. In the sentence at the door. Bianca looked at Amari through the glass. Tobias said, Let him learn where people like him belong. The words sounded different now. When Tobias said them, they were cruelty dressed as comedy. When Bianca repeated them, they became evidence. Amari did not react. That made Bianca feel worse. Amari entered the next command. Release main hall doors in safe order. The laboratory gave 3 tones. The outer visitor doors unlocked first. The emergency exit panels changed from red to green. Then the main demonstration hall doors opened. People stepped away from the doors as if freedom itself had become fragile. Amari checked the screen. Robot system paused. Safety cabinet locked. Sample protected. Server trace preserved. Door B12 isolated. Ready for storage release. Arturo looked at Hartwell. She looked at Amari. Release it. Amari typed the command. The amber light on storage room B12 turned green. Arturo opened the door. For a moment, Amari did not step out. He stood inside the narrow room with dust on one sleeve, his laptop under one arm, the technical tablet in his hand, and the worn backpack near his feet. He looked at the threshold. The old elevator memory returned. 47 minutes between floors, a dead emergency speaker, his father pulling him into the hallway. Machines do not hate you, son. Careless people can build machines that forget you are inside. Amari picked up his backpack. Then he stepped out. Priya looked like she wanted to hug him, but she stopped herself. Are you all right? Yes. Dr. Hartwell approached. Mr. Kingston? He looked at her. I am sorry. This time he let the words exist, but he did not treat them as enough. Thank you. Now the Institute needs to decide whether it is sorry for the incident or responsible for the culture that allowed it. Hartwell's mouth tightened. Not in anger, in recognition. Tobias stepped forward. This has gone too far. I made a bad call. But he is turning it into a public execution because he wants the spotlight. Amari looked at him. You had the spotlight. You used it to hide a door. Silence. Professor Voss stood. I want the contribution documents displayed. Tobias turned toward her. Excuse me, the system architecture, the code authorship, the safety sign-off, and the master authority record. If this team ran a live build without the safety architect present, the judges need to know who held what authority. Dr. Hartwell turned to the technical desk. Pull the Neurolab grid contribution ledger. The technician hesitated. Hartwell said, Now. The screen changed. Neurolab grid, system architecture, safety kernel, failure state preservation, master override protocol. Lead architect, Amari Kingston. Presentation layer, dashboard visualization, demo flow, Tobias Hawthorne, Bianca Carrington, Miles Ashford. Testing support, Priya Nwosu. Safety sign-off status, pending final review by Amari Kingston. The last line glowed like a verdict. Pending final review. The demo should not have run. Tobias stared at the screen. Bianca whispered, We were going to run it anyway. Miles said, Tobias said the sign-off was just paperwork. Amari looked at the ledger. Safety paperwork is written by people who remember bodies are involved. Arturo Delgado lowered his eyes. That sentence found him, too. He was head of facility safety. He had allowed broad event lock permissions for student presenters because the Hawthorne Group had donor visibility and institute trust. He had seen the family name and assumed confidence meant control. I approved broad event lock permissions for the finalist team, Arturo said. Dr. Hartwell turned. Why? Because the Hawthorne Group had donor visibility, previous access, and institute priority. I treated them as low risk. Amari looked at him. People become high risk when no one checks them. Arturo nodded. Yes. It was not forgiveness. It was the beginning of accountability. Dr. Hartwell turned to the security console. Preserve all corridor footage, storage room footage, access logs, build history, contribution ledger, event lock permissions, emergency trace, and witness statements under Institute Ethics hold and external judge copy. Arturo entered the command. The screen displayed a new file, Ethics Review Hold, Case Vanguard Safety 317, Evidence Sealed, External Copy Granted to Finalist Judging Panel. The room changed again. The evidence no longer depended on Hartwell pride. It no longer depended on Tobias honesty. It no longer depended on Bianca fear. The truth had a locked file of its own. Dr. Hartwell turned to Tobias. Tobias Hawthorne, you are suspended from the NeuroLab Grid presentation, pending immediate ethics review. Tobias stepped back. What? Bianca Carrington, you are removed from presentation authority, pending review of your recording and participation. Bianca lowered her head. Miles Ashford, you are required to provide a full statement. Your cooperation will be considered, but your participation remains under review. Miles nodded, shaking. Hartwell turned to Arturo. Facility safety will review how event lock authority was granted to student presenters. Arturo answered, Yes, Dr. Hartwell. Then she looked at Amari. Mr. Kingston, the floor is yours if you choose to complete the technical explanation. The room turned toward him. The stage was open. The screen showed his name. The judges waited. Priya waited. Tobias, who had tried to lock him behind a door, now stood outside the presentation with no authority over it. Amari looked at the stage, then at storage room B12. He did not smile. I will explain the system, but I will not pretend today was only a technical failure. Professor Voss nodded. Good. Amari walked to the front of the hall. No applause, no music, only footsteps. A young black scholar with a dusty sleeve, a taped laptop case, and the master override code still active in the system he had written. He stood beneath the silver sign for the National Autonomous Lab Innovation Final. NeuroLab Grid did what it was built to do, he said. It stopped when unsafe commands conflicted. It protected samples. It preserved data. It refused authority that did not match the risk. The failure today was not that the system locked down. He looked at Tobias. The failure was that people with access forgot access is not character. The dashboard behind him changed to the preserved trace. Line by line, it showed the truth. Unauthorized visualization state request. Safety loop conflict. Event lock active on storage room B12. Safety architect confined. Master override required. Emergency recovery initiated by Amari Kingston. Amari turned back to the judges. This is why the safety kernel exists. Not because machines are evil. Because people can be careless, proud, frightened, ambitious, biased, and cruel. A laboratory system must be designed for the moment when a person with permission uses it without wisdom. The hall was silent. This was not the demo Tobias wanted. It was stronger. It was uglier. It was true. Amari continued. If a system protects data but forgets people, it is incomplete. If it protects equipment but ignores coercion, it is incomplete. If it protects prestige before safety, it is dangerous. NeuroLab Grid is built around one principle. When human safety and task completion conflict, the task must stop. Priya looked at him with tears she did not wipe away. Dr. Hartwell looked at the floor. Tobias looked at the screen, trapped by the trace he had tried to make irrelevant. Then Priya leaned toward the console. Amari, he turned. There is a hidden commit note in the visualization patch. Tobias' face went white. Priya opened it under the preserved trace. The note appeared on the main screen. Temporary bypass until after opening. Kingston can object later. The room did not need Amari to explain what that meant. The lock on the storage door had removed him from the room. The hidden commit note showed why. Tobias had not only wanted Amari embarrassed, he had wanted the safety architect absent when the unsafe build went live. Dr. Hartwell looked at Tobias. This was planned before he ever reached B12. Tobias said nothing. Professor Voss closed her folder. Then this final is suspended pending full ethics review. The words moved through the hall like a new lock. Not on Amari, on the institution that had almost let the wrong people own the truth. Amari stood beside the preserved trace. He did not feel victorious. He felt tired. But he did not step back, not yet, because some doors only open after the record learns who closed them. Amari Kingston stood beside the preserved trace while the final stopped being a competition. The stage lights still burned. Judges and donors still sat in front, but the room no longer belonged to the stage. It belonged to the screen. Ethics Review, hold. Case Vanguard Safety 317, evidence sealed, external judge copy active. Dr. Livia Hartwell stared at those lines. Tobias Hawthorne stood near the dashboard he had wanted to own. Bianca Carrington kept her phone low in one shaking hand. Miles Ashford looked at the floor. Priya Nwosu stayed beside the console. Arturo Delgado stayed at the facility terminal. Then Charles Hawthorne entered. His family name was on a research wing 2 floors above. His money had opened doors at Vanguard for 12 years. He looked at Hartwell. Livia, move this into a private room. Amari looked toward storage room B12. So did that. Charles turned. Young man, I am trying to protect the Institute. No, Amari said. You are trying to protect silence before it becomes record. Professor Helena Voss stood from the judges' row. The judging panel requests immediate review before scoring continues. Authorship, access abuse, and system tampering are unresolved. The project is suspended pending review. Tobias stiffened. Suspended. It was the first door closing on him. Bianca's thumb moved over her phone screen. Priya saw it. Do not delete that. Bianca froze. I was not. Then keep not deleting it. Arturo approached with an evidence pouch. Your phone contains video related to the ethics hold. Surrender it voluntarily, or we document refusal. Tobias whispered, Do not give them anything. Hartwell said, Tobias. Bianca handed over the phone. Arturo sealed it. Item 1. Phone belonging to Bianca Carrington. Voluntary surrender for video preservation in case Vanguard Safety 317. Bianca whispered, It was just a video. Amari said, A video becomes heavy when it records what people wanted to keep light. At 10:52, the review moved into the secure seminar room beside the laboratory. There was no stage now, only a table, a wall screen, and records that did not care who paid for the building. Hartwell opened the review. This proceeding concerns unauthorized confinement, unapproved build activation, possible misrepresentation of technical contribution, improper event lock use, and discriminatory conduct. Charles leaned forward. Discriminatory conduct is a serious phrase. Priya answered, So was the phrase at the door. Hartwell signaled to Arturo. Begin with access. Arturo opened the facility log. Storage room B12, event lock engaged at 9:52, user credential Tobias Hawthorne. Manual release disabled during demonstration mode, linked to demonstration event chain. Temporary finalist event access, requested by Tobias Hawthorne, reviewed by Facility Safety, approved by Arturo Delgado. He did not hide from the last line. Hartwell asked, Was event lock authority necessary for the presentation? No. Why was it granted? The team requested backroom control for demonstration flow.
I treated them as low risk because they had prior access and institute priority.
Amari looked at him. Because Tobias was trusted before he was checked. Arturo nodded. Yes. Hartwell turned to Tobias. Why did you request event lock access? Demonstration flow. Amari asked, which part of the demonstration required disabling manual release on storage room B12? Tobias glared at him. I was not speaking to you. Hartwell said, you are now answering him. The person Tobias had locked away was now the person he had to answer. Tobias said, we needed control over support areas. Did B12 contain an active demo module? No. Did you know manual release would be disabled? It was temporary. That is not an answer. Yes. Professor Voss said, play the corridor footage. The screen showed Tobias leading Amari down the service corridor. Bianca stood near the wall with her phone angled toward the storage door. Miles hovered behind them. Tobias opened B12. Amari glanced at the lock panel. He glanced at the camera. He looked at Miles. Then he stepped inside. Tobias pressed the external lock before Amari had fully turned. The door sealed. The red light came on. Amari appeared in the small window. Open it. Tobias leaned close. Opening presentation is in 5 minutes. You can come out when the important people have heard from the actual team. Bianca laughed behind the phone. Amari said, this is a safety violation. Tobias answered, no, this is a lesson. Then came the line. Let him learn where people like him belong. No one spoke. Charles looked at the table. Tobias stared at the screen with anger, not shame. Arturo switched to the storage room camera. Amari stood inside B12 and spoke clearly. I am Amari Kingston. I am locked inside storage room B12 at 9:53 on the morning of the National Autonomous Lab Innovation Final. Tobias Hawthorne activated the external lock after leading me here under false pretenses. Bianca Carrington recorded the incident. Miles Ashford witnessed it. This is unauthorized confinement inside an active laboratory environment and a serious safety violation. Hartwell stopped the clip. This was before containment. Arturo answered, yes, before the robots froze. Yes, before the master override request. Yes. Professor Voss looked at Tobias. Then it was documented, before any later interpretation. Tobias said, he knew how to make himself look like the victim. Amari turned. I did not make myself look trapped. You locked the door. Hartwell moved to build history. Priya opened the repository record. At 2:12 in the morning, Bianca uploaded the visualization patch. At 2:18, Miles flagged conflict with the safety loop display layer. At 2:26, Tobias marked the warning, non-blocking. At 2:39, Tobias added a hidden commit note. Temporary bypass until after opening. Kingston can object later. Hartwell read it aloud. Kingston can object later. Miles said, Tobias said, if Amari was there first, the judges would focus on the kernel instead of our presentation. Bianca whispered, he said it was just paperwork. Tobias snapped, you are both trying to save yourselves. Miles looked up. Yes, and tell the truth. Both can be true. Priya opened the next record. Safety sign-off status. Pending final review by Amari Kingston. Professor Voss turned to Tobias. Why did you arm the live demo while final safety sign-off was pending? The patch was visual. Amari stepped closer to the screen. It was visual until you gave it state authority. Priya opened the line. Visualization command bridge active. Unauthorized state request enabled. Amari spoke to the panel. The dashboard should show what the lab is doing. It should not decide what the lab is doing. Tobias' team gave the presentation layer authority to request state changes. During the emergency simulation, it conflicted with robot protocol and sample protection. The safety kernel stopped the room because the room needed stopping. Dr. Evan Sato asked, "Did Neurolab Grid fail?" No, it refused unsafe authority. Charles Hawthorne leaned back. "Convenient. You held the code, you ran recovery, and now you define the story." Amari faced him. "That is why I built the override, not to trust me alone. It required witnesses. It delayed because I was confined. It preserved trace before release. It stored access logs. It gave external copy to the judges. I do not want a system that believes me because I matter. I want a system that proves what happened when people decide I do not." The room fell silent. Charles looked away first. Hartwell said, "Show the contribution ledger." Priya changed the screen. Neurolab Grid, System Architecture, Safety Kernel, Failure State Preservation, Master Override Protocol, Lead Architect, Amari Kingston. Presentation Layer, Dashboard Visualization, Demo Flow, Tobias Hawthorne, Bianca Carrington, Miles Ashford. Testing Support. Priya Nuosu, Safety Sign-Off, pending final review by Amari Kingston. The ledger showed the difference between the part made to impress and the part made to protect. Hartwell stared at it. Why did Mr. Kingston enter with yellow access? Priya opened the access change record. Technical clearance was approved last week. It changed this morning at 8:17. By whom? Priya clicked. Event Access Coordinator. Approved by Tobias Hawthorne. The room froze again. Tobias said, "That is not what it means." Priya opened the note. Presenter alignment. External contributor to finalist access only until team review. Amari looked at Tobias. External contributor. Tobias said, "You were not on site." Amari answered, "My code was." Tobias had weakened Amari access before Amari reached the building. Miles spoke quietly. Tobias said full access would let Amari take over. Bianca added, "He told me to film if Amari made a scene." Tobias stood. "Enough!" Hartwell said, "Sit down." He stared at her. She did not move. Tobias sat. At 11:36, Hartwell called Dean Marisol Keene, the Institute Ethics Chair. Dean Keene joined by secure video within 10 minutes. She reviewed the sealed file index, corridor footage, storage room statement, event lock access log, build history, hidden commit note, contribution ledger, access change record, emergency trace, witness statements. Dean Keene said, "This is sufficient for interim measures." Charles spoke first. "Interim measures before a full hearing would be prejudicial." Dean Keene looked at him through the screen. "So is allowing students to keep lab access after using a lock system against another participant." Charles' mouth closed. Dean Keene continued. "Effective immediately, Tobias Hawthorne is suspended from all laboratory access, finalist participation, project representation, repository permissions, and event authority pending a full conduct hearing. Bianca Carrington is suspended from finalist participation and laboratory access pending review. Miles Ashford is suspended from laboratory access and required to cooperate as a witness. His cooperation will be considered, but participation remains under review." Tobias looked at his father. This time, Charles could not open the door for him. Dean Keene turned to Hartwell. "Vanguard will also open an institutional inquiry into event permissions, donor influence, access control, contributor recognition, and treatment of external scholars." Hartwell nodded. "Understood." Charles stood. The Hawthorne family will reconsider its commitments to this institute. Hartwell looked at him. Then we will have to become an institute that can survive telling the truth. Dean Keene added, any donor communication attempting to influence this conduct review will be added to the inquiry. Charles sat down. Not because he agreed, because the room had finally stopped bending.
At 12:18, Arturo disabled Tobias laboratory access. The screen displayed each line: User Tobias Hawthorne. Laboratory access suspended. Event control revoked. Repository write permission revoked. Presentation authority revoked. Bianca access followed. Miles access followed. Each line was a door closing. Tobias stared at the screen. For the first time, he was outside a system he expected to control. Amari did not smile. Dean Keene looked at him. Mr. Kingston, are you requesting removal from the project or protected continuation? Amari had thought about leaving since the moment he stepped out of B-12. Part of him wanted to take the colonel and let Vanguard explain why its perfect finalist could not continue without the scholar it allowed to be locked away. That would be justified. It would not be enough. He looked at Priya. She needed the room to change, not merely feel guilty. I will continue only under conditions. Dean Keene said, state them.
Full authorship review before any award decision. Safety sign-off cannot be bypassed by presenters, sponsors, faculty, or donors. Event log permissions must be revoked and rebuilt. Storage rooms must have independent emergency release unless a documented hazard requires seal. External contributors must receive access based on technical role. Priya Nuosu must be protected from retaliation. The emergency trace must remain available to the ethics panel and judging panel. The Institute must state clearly that NeuroLab Grid contained the unsafe event rather than caused it. Charles said, publicly. Amari looked at him. Yes, public correction matters when the damage was public. Dean Keene said, conditions entered. Hartwell ordered the interim document prepared. While the order printed, Professor Voss asked Amari to explain the recovery for the official record. He agreed. Not on the stage, in the seminar room, with Priya at the console and Arturo at facility safety. The people pushed to the edge of the system were now holding it steady. Amari explained each step in plain language. The robot paused because the colonel saw conflict. The sample survived because staged recovery returned it first. The data trace survived because evidence was preserved before reset. The storage door waited because its lock chain had to be isolated from containment. The coercion delay activated because the master authority was confined. Dr. Sato asked, why include coercion delay in a lab override? Amari answered, because a password can be forced. A safe system should ask whether the human entering the code is free enough to mean it. Professor Voss asked, why did you design that? Amari looked at his old backpack. When I was 8, I was trapped in a broken elevator for 47 minutes. The emergency speaker failed. The buttons did nothing. My father told me careless people can build machines that forget someone is inside. I write systems so they remember. At 1:25, the interim order printed. Hartwell signed first. Dean Keene signed digitally. Professor Voss signed as external witness. Arturo signed the facility correction section. Amari read every line before signing the protected continuation conditions. Priya stood beside the printer, reading the line that named her. Protected witness and safety support. She touched the words. I almost did not speak. Amari looked at her. But you did. After harm already happened. Yes. He did not rescue her from that truth. She nodded. Next time, I speak sooner. Good. At 1:40, Tobias was escorted to collect his belongings under supervision. His badge no longer opened the lab wing. He stopped near the seminar room door and looked at Amari. You think this proves you belong here? Amari picked up his backpack. No. Tobias frowned. Amari stepped closer. I belonged here before you knew my name.
The review only proved you had no right to decide otherwise. Tobias had no answer. Security opened the door for him. This time, he left because the system allowed it. At 2:05, Vanguard sent an internal notice. The National Autonomous Lab Innovation Final is suspended pending ethics and safety review. Evidence in case Vanguard Safety 317 has been preserved. Laboratory access for involved students has been restricted. NeuroLab Grid Safety Kernel functioned as designed during containment. Further review will address conduct, authorship, event permissions, access control, and institutional culture. At 3:30, Amari returned to storage room B12 with Priya and Arturo. He did not need anything inside. He needed to see the door open. The lock was green. Arturo held a work order tablet. Emergency modification request, independent manual release, event lock permission removal, two-person authorization for any storage seal during live demonstration. Logged and signed. He handed it to Amari. "Will you review the safety language?" Amari looked at him. "You are asking me now?" Arturo accepted that. "Yes." Amari changed one line. Original wording. "Authorized personnel may release door during event." He replaced it. "Any person inside may trigger emergency release unless a documented hazardous condition is confirmed by facility safety." Arturo read the new line. Then he signed. That was the first repair. Small, specific, real. At 4:15, Hartwell found Amari in the lobby. "I let Tobias become a symbol before I checked whether he had substance," she said. "I let donor confidence become operational trust. I let your access issue sit at registration. That is not the same as locking the door, but it helped build the hallway." Amari looked at her. Yes, the word did not spare her. "Tomorrow we begin the institutional review," she said. "Dean Keene, external judges, facility safety, research integrity, student equity, and you, if you are willing. I will not help Vanguard protect its reputation." Hartwell said, "Good. Help us earn a different one." At 5:06, Amari walked out of Vanguard Biosystems Institute with Priya beside him. His badge had been corrected. Technical access, safety kernel lead, master override authority. Priya smiled faintly. "That badge should have been right this morning." "Yes, you still came in with the wrong one. I had work to do." Outside, the evening air was cold. Amari touched the old library card sleeve inside his backpack. The card had expired years ago, but he kept it because the library was the first place a machine gave him time by rule instead of favor. 40 minutes for every child, rich or poor, known or unknown. Tomorrow the reckoning would move beyond Tobias, into access, into authorship, into donor influence, into every quiet rule that had told brilliant people to wait outside until someone richer decided they were useful. Then Amari walked forward, not as the man rescued from a storage room, as the man who had opened the room and left the evidence behind. The next morning, Vanguard Biosystems Institute looked unchanged. The glass still shone. The robot chamber still stood under clean light. The donor wall still carried famous names. Students still moved through the lobby with badges clipped to their jackets. But people looked at doors differently. They looked at access panels differently. They looked at Amari Kingston differently too. Some looked with respect. Some looked with guilt. A few looked away because truth had made them uncomfortable. Amari did not come back for their looks. He came because the review had to move beyond Tobias Hawthorne. Punishing Tobias was necessary. It was not enough. At 9 in the morning, Dean Marisol Keene opened the institutional inquiry in the secure seminar room beside the lab. Dr. Livia Hartwell sat to her right. Professor Helena Voss joined as external judge. Arturo Delgado brought the facility safety records. Priya Nuosu sat beside the technical console as protected witness and safety support. Amari sat at the far end of the table with his worn backpack at his feet. Dean Keene looked around the room. Yesterday exposed a student conduct failure, a facility safety failure, a project governance failure, and a culture failure. We will not reduce it to one student mistake.
Dr. Hartwell looked down. That sentence entered the record. The first file was Tobias Hawthorne, unauthorized confinement, misuse of event lock authority, activation of unapproved demonstration build, misrepresentation of technical readiness, attempt to bypass safety sign-off, discriminatory statement, interference with project authorship. Each charge was read aloud. No one softened the words. Dean Keene asked, "Miss Nuosu, do you want to add anything before we move to facility safety?" Priya looked toward the storage corridor. People keep saying Tobias locked Amari in a room. That is true, but before that, he tried to lock him out of credit, out of access, and out of the room where decisions were made.
The physical door was only the most visible part. Amari nodded once. Dean Keene wrote it down. The physical door was only the most visible part. Then Arturo presented the facility review. Event lock privileges had been granted too broadly. Manual release could be disabled too easily. Student presenters could request support room restrictions without independent safety justification. Access level changes were approved through event coordination without technical role verification. No automatic alert had been sent when Amari technical clearance was reduced. Storage room B12 had no independent emergency release during demonstration mode. Arturo read the last line slowly. The system behaved according to its written rules. The rules were insufficient. Dean Keene asked, "Who approved the rule set?" Arturo answered, "I did." He did not add excuses. Amari said, "A system that fails honestly can be repaired. A person who hides failure makes repair impossible." Arturo looked at him.
Then we repair it honestly. By noon, the first permanent changes were drafted. All storage rooms connected to live demonstration chains would receive independent emergency release from inside. Event lock authority would no longer be granted to student presenters. Any temporary lockout would require 2 facility safety approvals and a written hazard basis. Technical access could not be reduced by a student team member. Safety sign-off could not be bypassed by presenters, sponsors, faculty, donors, or directors. Any build touching a safety loop, state authority, robot protocol, or data protection layer required lead architect review before activation. Priya read each line. Then she asked, "Where is the protection for people who report access abuse?" Dean Keene looked at her. "Draft it." Priya hesitated. "Me?" "Yes. You saw what the policy missed." Priya moved to the keyboard. Her fingers shook once. Then she typed, "Any student, staff member, external contributor, contractor, or research assistant may report misuse of access control, authorship suppression, safety bypass, retaliation threat, discriminatory treatment, or coercive conduct to an independent safety ethics channel. Reports must be acknowledged within 1 business day. Retaliation triggers immediate access review." Amari said, "Add 1 line." Priya looked at him. "Reports involving locks, confinement, or physical access cannot be routed only through the accused team or faculty sponsor." Priya added it. Dean Keene nodded. "That becomes interim policy today." Dr. Hartwell signed it at 1:20. Not later, that day. The second reckoning came 2 days later. Tobias appeared before the conduct panel with his attorney and his father behind him. He wore a dark suit and an expression built from resentment rather than regret. Dean Keene read the findings. The corridor footage showed the lock. The access log showed his credential. The hidden commit note showed prior intent. The contribution ledger showed Amari authority. The badge change showed suppression before arrival. The emergency trace showed the system conflict. The witness statements confirmed planning. Tobias listened with his jaw tight. When asked whether he had anything to say, he looked at Amari. "You turned 1 mistake into my entire identity." Amari answered, "No, you used your identity to make 1 mistake possible." Tobias blinked. Amari continued, "You were not punished because your family is rich. You were punished because you believed that meant consequences should arrive slower for you." Charles Hawthorne stood. "This is moral theater." Dean Keene looked at him. "No, this is a conduct hearing." The final sanctions were read before 3 in the afternoon. Tobias Hawthorne was suspended for 2 academic years with conditions for any return. His laboratory access was revoked. His finalist eligibility was terminated. His repository permission was removed. His conduct record would include unauthorized confinement, safety protocol misuse, and academic interference. His family was barred from contacting faculty, judges, or administrators regarding the conduct case outside formal legal channels. Bianca received a 1-year suspension from laboratory work, mandatory ethics review, and removal from finalist presentation authority. Her surrendered video remained part of the case record. Miles received probation, loss of laboratory access for 1 year, and mandatory testimony. The panel noted his late cooperation, but refused to call it courage without cost. After the hearing, Miles found Amari in the hallway. "I am sorry." Amari looked at him. "For what?" "For not stopping it. That is the part that matters." Miles nodded, eyes wet. "I keep thinking I was not the one who pressed the lock." Amari waited. Miles said, "But I helped the room become a place where he could press it." Amari gave him no easy rescue. "Then do not waste the lesson." Miles walked away lighter than before, but not free. That was right. Some guilt should not disappear. It should become responsibility. The third reckoning came through authorship. For years, Vanguard had allowed presentation teams to polish work until the people behind the safest code became footnotes. NeuroLab Grid forced the Institute to confront that habit. The revised contribution ledger was displayed before the judging panel and Research Integrity Office. Lead architect, Amari Kingston. Safety kernel, Amari Kingston. Master override protocol, Amari Kingston. Failure state preservation, Amari Kingston. Testing support and safety validation, Priya Nwosu. Presentation layer, Tobias Hawthorne. Dashboard visualization, Bianca Carrington. Demo flow assistance, Miles Ashford. Unapproved visualization bridge, under investigation. The words were plain. Plain words become powerful when an institution can no longer hide behind praise. Professor Voss addressed the panel. "The award cannot be given as if yesterday did not happen. But the technical merit of the safety kernel is proven by the containment event itself." Dr. Evan Sato added, "The system protected human life, samples, and data under hostile misuse. That is evidence of design maturity." Dean Keene turned to Amari. "The panel recommends recognition of NeuroLab Grid under corrected authorship and delayed award release after ethics separation. Do you accept?" Amari asked, "What does corrected mean in practice?" Professor Voss answered, "Your name leads the project. Priya receives testing and safety validation credit. Tobias, Bianca, and Miles are listed only for verified non-violating contributions. Any contribution tied to unapproved build activity remains under review." Amari looked at Priya. She gave the smallest nod. He turned back. "I accept only if the award statement says the safety kernel contained an unsafe event caused by unauthorized human action." Dr. Hartwell said, "It will."
And if the Institute creates a funded program for students who build invisible safety work, not only impressive presentation layers. Hartwell answered, "As a funded program, the award announcement went out 1 week later. NeuroLab Grid received technical recognition under corrected authorship. The announcement stated that the safety kernel had preserved human safety, sample integrity, and data trace during an unauthorized demonstration conflict. It named Amari Kingston as lead architect. It named Priya Nwosu for testing support and safety validation. It also confirmed disciplinary and policy proceedings. Then he called his mother. Della Kingston answered after her overnight shift, voice tired but warm. "I saw the announcement," she said. Amari stood outside the laboratory, looking at his corrected badge. I did not want you to see the storage part. Baby, I saw worse parts of this world before you were born. You all right? He did not answer quickly. No. His mother was quiet. Then she said, "Good. Do not lie to me to protect me." He smiled faintly. "I am working on it. Your father would have said the machine remembered you." Amari closed his eyes. "Yes. And I am saying something else. Make sure the people remember, too." That sentence followed him back to Vanguard. 6 months later, storage room B12 no longer had the same door. The new door had glass panels, independent emergency release, and a visible safety notice. No person may be locked inside this room by event control. Emergency release is available from inside unless a documented hazardous condition is active. All lock events are logged and reviewed. Below it was a line added after student feedback. Access is a safety responsibility, not a status symbol. Priya read that line on the morning of the first Safety Ethics Fellowship orientation. She had been named the inaugural fellow. Not as a reward for perfection, the appointment letter said something more honest. For recognizing risk, preserving truth, and helping build stronger reporting systems after institutional failure. Amari returned to Vanguard that day as guest instructor for a program called Equity in Autonomous Science Systems. He did not begin on the stage. He began in the storage corridor. 20 students gathered around him. Some came from public schools, some came from community colleges, some came from wealthy universities. Some wore new blazers, some carried old backpacks. Amari opened the door to B12. This room is where people learned the wrong lesson first. The students looked inside. A safe system is not only a system that can stop a robot, it must also stop a culture from turning access into a weapon. A student raised her hand. "Were you scared?" Amari answered honestly, "Yes." Another student asked, "Why did you keep working with Vanguard after what happened?" "Because leaving would have protected me. Staying with conditions helped protect the next person." Priya stood beside him and added, "Conditions matter. Never give an institution your pain for free." Some students wrote that down. Amari walked them to the lab chamber and showed them the safety kernel map. He explained the coercion delay, the preserved evidence trace, the staged recovery, and the new reporting channel. After the session, Hartwell found Amari near the new safety notice. "The board approved the Kingston Safety Fellowship this morning." Amari looked at her. "I did not ask for my name on it." "I know. Your mother did." He stared at her. Hartwell smiled gently. "She said if the institute was going to use your story, it should at least use your name correctly." For the first time inside Vanguard, Amari laughed. Softly, briefly. His mother had always known how to turn a room without entering it. The fellowship funded students working on invisible safety infrastructure, access logs, emergency releases, data protection, human-centered override systems, reporting channels, failure states. The parts of technology that did not look glamorous until everything depended on them. At the dedication, Amari held the old library card sleeve in one hand. "This was my first access badge." The room listened. 40 minutes on a public computer, same as every other child. Nobody asked whether I looked like I belonged to the machine. The timer gave me my turn. That was enough to begin. He looked at the students. Build systems like that. Systems that do not flatter power. Systems that do not forget people. Systems that keep a record when someone tries to turn cruelty into procedure. He lowered the card. And when you hold a code, a key, a badge, or a door, remember that access is never just technical. It is moral. Tobias was not there. His absence did not need to become a shadow over the day. The story was no longer about him. That was another form of justice. 1 year after the lockdown, NeuroLab Grid entered its first pilot installation at a public research hospital. The safety kernel passed every independent review. The master override protocol was praised because it was careful. It required witnesses. It preserved trace. It checked coercion. It slowed power down when speed could hurt someone. Amari visited the installation with Priya, now leading safety validation for the pilot. A hospital engineer asked why the system had so many checks before final override. Priya answered before Amari could. Because the worst failures do not always begin with machines. Sometimes they begin with people who are certain they should not be questioned. Amari looked at her. That was a good answer. She smiled. I had a good mentor. The final plaque outside storage room B12 was small. No system is safe if people are treated as disposable. Students passed it every day. Some stopped, some did not. But the door beside it opened from the inside now, every time. And that mattered. Tobias Hawthorne once believed he could lock a black scholar in a storage room and steal the first 5 minutes of a national stage. He thought access was power. He thought polish was proof. He thought a family name could turn cruelty into a prank and a safety violation into a misunderstanding. He was wrong. The access log remembered. The camera remembered. The build history remembered. The master override protocol remembered. Most of all, Amari Kingston remembered why he built systems in the first place. Not to make machines look brilliant. To make them stop when people were in danger. Not to give power a faster command. To make power answer to proof. The day Amari stepped out of storage room B12, the room saw more than the person who held the master override code. It saw the truth that had been locked away with him. The people told they do not belong are often the ones who understand the room most deeply. The quiet work is often the work that saves everything. And a locked door is never the final word when the person behind it knows how the whole system was built. Amari did not need to tell Tobias that people like him belonged. He proved something stronger. People like him build the code that opens the door.